welcome to Energy Chat. We're going to talk about what the National Grid is. The National Grid is actually a company which owns and operates two assets. One is the electricity network, transmission network, and one is the gas transmission network. So these are two networks. One's consisting of lots of cables and one's consisting of lots of pipes full of gas, natural gas. We're going to concentrate on the electricity network today. And the first thing to know about it is that it's built around power stations. Originally, you might have a power station for each city and a local grid. Those grids were connected to form the national grid. So they're built around power stations, and we'll have a look at what the grid looks like. Just to reinforce how electricity is made, in case you can't remember from your physics lessons at school. This is important about what we're talking about, the national grid. So I've drawn a diagram here. It's actually just a bit too good to rub off. That's why I'm starting with this. So I drew it and I was like, oh, that's really good. Let me know in the comments if you think it's actually good. So this is how we generate electricity. And this is the classical way to generate electricity for a grid. And the national grid was mostly built around coal-fired power stations on the island of Great Britain. So this is a boiler. So it's like a tank of water, and there's some sort of fire underneath the boiler. The fire's from coal or gas or oil. And then water is heated, and it turns into steam, goes up, turns a turbine, which is like a water wheel for steam. The turbine is connected by a drive shaft to a generator. Generator is essentially a magnet, which looks like a magnet from school there, spinning near a coil of wire. The physics bit is that when a magnet spins near a coil of wire, it induces a current to flow in the wire. Basically, a changing magnetic field through a conductive material induces electrons to flow through that material. And because electricity is generated with a rotating machine, you get alternating current electricity. So the electricity looks like this sine wave at the top here. The current goes up and down, above and below zero. As the magnet passes past the coil, the current goes up. As it spins around and moves away from the coil, the current goes down again. The electricity in the national grid is AC, goes like this, backwards and forwards, current going up and down. And that's completely related to the spinning machines that generate the electricity. So to recap, we're burning something, creating heat, turning water into steam, steam turns a turbine, turbine turns a generator, generator produces AC electricity, alternating current electricity, as opposed to DC electricity, which is direct current. So we're using fossil fuel to create alternating current electricity, which looks like this. As I explained earlier, it's created using a magnet. A change in magnetic field near a wire creates a current to flow in the wire. And the waveform of the current is the shape of the changing magnetic field. So it goes up and down and up and down. This is how electricity is transmitted to us. So AC, electricity in this form, where essentially kind of pushes backwards and forwards. But the pushing backwards and forwards transmits work or energy through the lines, through the cables of the national grid from the power station to your house. And you can imagine how energy is transmitted with AC by, if you just, there's a couple of ways of potentially, if someone was standing very still, you could potentially push them over, right? There's a couple of ways of doing it. One, you can apply steady pressure to their arm and they might fall over, or you can just continually poke them like that and eventually they'll fall over. So those are the two kind of, so AC is obviously the poking analogy. But let's just think about the nature of the electricity that's coming into your house. AC electricity, to be transmitted, it requires a magnetic field. So if we look at the national grid, in fact, I'll just get rid of this for a second. National grid is, just going to draw a random network, but it's a bunch of cables that all kind of connect together across the country that serve maybe a major power station here, to a node, and then beyond that's a much smaller network where maybe someone's house would be at it there at the bottom. So you're taking power from the power station all the way to someone's house. And that's the basic function of the grid, the electricity grid. And if you see a big pylon somewhere when you're driving around, big overhead wires, that's part of the transmission network. It's the big part of the network. And in your local street, you'll have poles with wires on them that are part of the distribution network. So that's this low-level network. It's almost like the nerves in your body. So you've got tiny nerves in your fingertips, and you've got a big nerve in your spine. That's kind of the same thing. So the big nerve connects all the power stations together. So maybe another power station here. And the smaller nerves that feed off each node take the electricity to people's houses. So that's kind of what the grid looks like. If you just do a little tiny, I'll just do it in a different colour, tiny example of what the electricity waveform looks like now. So to push AC electricity from a power station to a house, you actually need a magnetic field to push it through. It's a bit weird. So some of the work that the power stations do is to create a magnetic field in the entire network so that they can do this work. It's almost like you need to create a medium with which you can push and pull. Imagine if you've got a hydraulic system, you might understand that. You push one end, it pushes fluid, and then the fluid pushes the other end. To create the medium in which you can push electricity through a network, you need to create a magnetic field to do that with AC electricity. That's called reactive power that does that, and it's another topic, but part of the job that power stations do is to create a magnetic field which is in all of the network. So if you see all the overhead cables that you see, they are essentially magnets, and they're magnetized, and electricity is being pushed through them through AC power. And the magnetic field allows the power to be transmitted. Why is that important? It means that it takes energy to create the network to be able to send energy. And this is important because if the network fails, it takes a long time and a lot of energy to re-energize the network. So we talked about that the power stations are all creating this alternating current, and they're all spinning at that speed. So imagine everyone's doing this, and that is literally related, physically related to the magnet, to a spinning magnet going past the coil. That means that all the power stations have to be in sync with each other, and they're actually magnetically linked together, because inside the generator you've got a magnet going past a coil. But what you actually have, depending on where the magnet is in relation to the coil, you have kind of forces pulling you backwards and forwards. Because if one power station is out of sync with another power station, then you kind of have magnetic forces bringing the power station back into line. So it's so all the power stations are magnetically connected, and if one starts to slow down for a little reason, it's dragged back into line by the others. So inside the actual generator, what you're doing is you've got mechanical force from the steam turbine turning the magnets round, and then from the coil, once you create electricity flowing in the coil, that actually creates a opposite magnetic field which tries to slow the magnet down, weirdly, and that's what you're pushing against. So you're constantly putting steam into the turbine to do work, to turn the generator. But when you're turning the generator, once you create the current tries to resist the work, and that's why you have to keep putting steam in. So you've got inside the generator, you've got mechanical work from the turbine and electrical resistance, essentially trying to slow it down. So there's a balance between heat in, which creates movement, and electrical resistance. And that means that if a turbine just like turn the heat down on the boiler, then, or if a generator, turn the heat down on the boiler, the turbine would slow down and the power station would slow down, but it would be magnetically brought back into line. But because it would be continually slowing down, it might slow down all the power stations by a tiny amount, because it'd be creating drag on all of them and they'd all start to slow down. So in general, they all aim to keep at the same speed so that they can all keep going together and neither of them drag the other one back. So that's one reason why generators are aiming to be at the same speed all the time, which is 50 hertz, which manifests as 50 hertz. Depending on the arrangement of the magnets and the coils, the generator could be spinning faster or slower than the equivalent of 50 hertz in RPM. So what we have is a situation where you've got a bunch of generators and they're all rotating. And they're all rotating together and they're all kind of linked to each other, even though they're very far apart, potentially. They're all magnetically linked together. And if one slows down, it drags the rest back. So they all try to stay at the same speed. When you have a waveform, you can get harmonics. And harmonics, in terms of electricity, are incredibly dangerous things, because it's lots of power, essentially, at a different frequency. And these harmonics can do damage. They can start fires at substations. They can cause equipment to shut down, cause equipment to explode. So there's lots of filters built on all this electrical equipment to get rid of these harmonics. And the filters are tuned to a certain frequency. So if the main frequency slows down too much, the filter will be wrong and you start getting power surges that can blow things up. So basically the goal of the electricity network is to keep going at the same speed. All the turbines to keep rotating at the same speed. Now I described as well how inside the generator it's a fight between mechanical power or torque, mechanical turning force, and electrical resistance. And so all the generators have got to have a constant sort of amount of mechanical force, but they're going to go at the same speed, and so that means the electrical resistance determines how much mechanical force you've got to put in. Electrical resistance is people using electricity. So if I just draw another network, it's not the actual network again, but it's just a pretend one. If you're in your house down here, you've got a big power station up here. If you turn on your lights in your house, you create more electrical resistance inside the generator of the power station, which means that the power station starts to slow down. So it has to increase the amount of heat that it's putting into the boiler to turn the turbine. So essentially, if you got like everyone's house, there's another house here maybe, another one here. If you add up all of their electricity demand at any moment, so if they all decide to switch their lights on, suddenly, if that's the level of supply that you've got, demand might, I'll just use a slightly different colour, demand might be this, and then it might change to this. If everyone, for example, there's a football game, and everyone decides to, or a large amount of people in the country decide to put the kettle on at once, for example. It's a half-time or an advert break of a big Christmas movie or something. The demand, electricity demand for all the houses can go up really quickly. That means that the supply does not match the demand. That means that all the power stations will experience more resistance and they'll all start slowing down together. That's what we don't want to happen. We're going to once again draw this. This is a waveform. And if you turn it into the frequency domain, so the length of time that this takes, the t of that, is 1/50 seconds. Okay, that's 50 hertz. Okay, so if we draw a diagram where we measure the grid frequency, this is now hertz. That's 50. 50. God. Then we want to sort of stay there. And like I said before, if everyone starts using electricity at the same time, the frequency would drop. So it start going down. And then basically there's like limits on where we'll allow the grid frequency to go. If it goes too far, then things will start shutting down to protect themselves and you potentially get a chain reaction. Imagine if one generator wants to protect itself and switches off, that means the imbalance is even bigger and then cascading failure. So that's obviously bad, because as I said before, it takes a long time to start up the energy network if it shuts down. So these are like the safety limits, and this is the grid frequency. So as people all start to use electricity at the same time, I just an advert break on a big movie that everyone's watching, and everyone puts the kettle on, then the frequency will start to fall, and we need to get it back up, right? So to get it back up, there's a big control room for the grid, and it's located somewhere around London. So there's a control room which looks at all the energy that's being used and all the energy that's being generated, and it seeks to control the frequency between those two bands. You've got the two bands. This is the grid frequency. If it starts to drop, then they want to increase it, take it back to the baseline, 50 hertz. So what they do is they literally just there's a big red phone, and they just get on a phone and phone up a generator. Could be anyone, could be a wind power plant, could be a gas power plant. Those are the typical ones. And they say, hey, you need to turn up your heat in your boiler for 10 minutes. We need this much more energy from you in the next 10 minutes. And that'll literally make up for that small drop in frequency when everyone's using a kettle, for example. And that's called balancing. And what they're trying to do is keep the frequency between the statutory limits on the frequency. And basically it's a big control room, and they use a big phone, and they call up generators and say, you need to turn up and turn down. But how do they know who could do that? If we think about energy demand for a country, let's just say a day, that's one day, which again is backwards, so you just have to imagine that that's not backwards. Energy demand for a day might be something like this. So there'll be some low demand overnight, and then a peak, and then low demand again in the very late evening, electricity demand. It's basically the same for a house or for the country or whatever. And if we look at a year, it's like a bunch of these, and it'll be slightly bigger in the winter and slightly lower in the summer. Basically, we have to, because we've got to match generation of energy with usage of energy at every moment, we have to figure out what this is going to be. And when we figured out what it's going to be, we have to schedule power plants to be available. So you can imagine these as all little blocks like this. And we've got to have enough power plants to fill here, enough power plants to fill here. Need some more there, more there, more there, more there. And basically, these are scheduled through the use of markets. So on the sort of years scale, so for example, how much energy do we need 10 years from now? There's various government parts of the civil service that do the energy demand planning, and they will decide how much energy we need, and they might offer a tender for contracts to build a power station to supply energy in 10 years or so. And that means that you can win a contract to provide energy, you can get a fixed price even before the power station exists. And do that to make sure that there's enough power to meet demand in the future. Now, if we're just talking about supplying power tomorrow, then the closer and closer we get to delivery, there's different kinds of markets. So if we're looking at, imagine this is tomorrow, we might have a market to decide who's going to provide power here, today for delivery tomorrow, and that's called the day ahead market. And typically the power will be assigned by band, so there might be a block of power that looks like this, which is called base load. A lot of the time that's like nuclear power, things that aren't very good at turning up and down very fast. And then on top we might sell peak products. So these would be electricity forward agreements, so the contracts to provide energy in the future, provide electricity at a certain time, at a certain volume. And basically by having a market where people say, I can provide that electricity at that price, we build up a generation profile to match the demand profile. So once we've got mostly power plants scheduled and agreed on a price to provide energy tomorrow, then we know when we're experiencing this tomorrow, this demand curve, we've basically got it matched up. And then during the day, so overnight and then during the day, as we're experiencing this, we can trade again, and there's potentially power plant swap contracts, like I don't actually want to generate, so someone else can do it, or basically in that way, power plants that are available will be able to generate for a price. And it's up to every power plant to decide how much they want to generate. We talk about how that price is decided in a later video. But if you're a fossil fuel plant, normally you have to pay some amount of running cost for your plant and then the fuel cost on top of that. So if this is nuclear, this is going to be like the nuclear sort of fixed cost of running a nuclear power station plus the cost of the nuclear fuel. And if this is, for instance, a coal power plant for this chunk here, then that would be the price of the coal and the fixed price of running the coal power plant. Maybe the top bit here is a gas power plant. Again, that would be the cost of running the gas power plant and then the price of the gas. And because you're paying for the prices of different fuels, you can see why potentially a gas increase in global gas prices can affect the electricity price, because in every period we're selling electricity to the people that are able to provide it, and they'll bid at a price that's linked to their costs. And if you're getting most of your electricity through gas, which we do in the UK, that means that a high gas price can mean that the electricity price that you pay, that everyone pays, can be very high. But we'll get more into pricing in a different episode. So thanks for listening about the national grid, electricity grid. We're also going to talk about the national gas grid, which is similar but uses pressured pipelines. So there's a bit of storage in there. It's not just doesn't have to always be on. Doesn't have to always be injecting gas for people to use gas. And also the ways in which the grid frequency is managed. So we talked about a big red phone and a control room. There's potentially other ways that you can manage the supply and demand of electricity. Talk about energy markets and different forms of energy power plants and what they do to the grid. For example, wind turbines do something slightly different to the power plants that I've talked about, and they have different effects on the national grid and the price of energy that you pay. And we can talk about storage of electricity, so in like pumped hydro storage, like the Norwig power plant in Wales. And we can also talk about batteries, battery energy storage, and solar panels on your roof, in a field. What are they? What are they doing? How is it affecting the whole energy network? So please feel free to leave a comment with any questions you may have, and I can definitely answer them in a different video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and share it as well. There you go. Thanks a lot.